Okay, I've started this several times. The longest got 8 minutes. Didn't like it. And then the dogs went nuts, and I cussed at them. And I figured I might as well just cut that. So we're going to try it again, because we got a little bit... We burned a little energy. I don't know that it's enough to make a difference, honestly. However, we're home alone at the moment. It's 2:43, and if I'm going to do the damn video, I need to do the damn video. So, yeah, I kept having this when I was trying to figure out my start point. I just had this, this little thought that kept coming in saying, just start. Just start. And like... what I was struggling with was where to start, because there's like so many different start points, right? So like and I think that's kind of the point, is it doesn't matter, just start something, right? Just start somewhere, right? And I feel like, honestly, dog drinking, it was Ziva, now it's Taz. Tazzy. Hey, are you done yet? Thank you. He feels like he has to drink all the water at once. And I think that has something to do with when he got stuck staying behind with my ex for 9 months while I was in the trial run on figuring out what I needed to do in order to get out of that situation for good. He would spend, ultimately, it ended up being a thing where, since I wasn't allowed to bring the healer problem children with me because my mom didn't know them and she was watching Gracie at the time, so she didn't want to have dogs that might be potentially problematic with the kid around, which makes sense. But also, it gave me the opportunity to see if he was my ex was capable of taking care of something beyond himself, right? Because he'd have to handle the dogs, right? So he ended up, Gidget tore up one of his IU basketball hats, and he knew it was Gidge, and he decided to punish Taz because he didn't like male dogs, which he never once said before we got him. And it wasn't until we had him for a while and then went back. So part of what he could have not liked about him was just the fact that he's hard-headed, stubborn, big mouth, those things, which I get frustrated with. And that's one of the issues we were having. We played with the little puzzle game before I came back in here to do this, because he just kept barking at me, and it's like, what the fuck? So he is a herding dog, and he's way under-exercised on that end, and his brain doesn't get utilized as much as it should. So every now and then I'll get the puzzle game down, which the one they like best has the bottles on it that has the food in it, and then he's the only one that will do anything as far as flipping it, because you're supposed to flip the bottles over to get the food out of the holes on the top. And the girls are a little bit shorter than him, so I think that's part of why they won't do the do the work. Also, they just like the benefits of him doing the work. So there is that. Ziva has gotten I just had to get after her because she planted herself right directly under it, so it wasn't spinning real well, because every time the food came out, she wanted it first. The nice thing is, he'll do the thing, and he can occasionally get it to stand straight up, so, a little more comes out, depending on if he gets the angle right. But it's kind of funny to watch his brain work on that end. But yeah, he does at least share with he shares with his sisters. The other two, they don't come close enough because, my 3 are hard-headed enough that they can be assholes. That was why we put the game up, was because Ziva started growling at Taz and Gidget because they were too close to the food and she wanted the food. So, since daylight savings time is a stupid thing that happens anyway, when this was 3 o'clock No, when this was 3:48, because it's now 2:48, this was roughly dinner time, because dinner time became the time that Gracie got home from school, and that was always like 3:45. I don't know how it happened that way, but now they're very set on that way. So since daylight savings time happened, it got delayed. In years past, it wasn't an issue because Gracie was coming over after school, so they knew whenever she was around after school, that was when it was. This time, she's not around, so they didn't make that adjustment so easy, so it's kind of a pain in the ass. And she's cranky because I didn't feed her all of the food, and she wants all of the food. But the other part of that is, if they get it early, then they're going to wake me up earlier for their breakfast, and I don't want to get up. Like this morning, I think I got up and fed them at like 4:30. That was fine. But I don't need to make it a habit of making it earlier and earlier, and they have... I mean, if I wake up at 2 o'clock because I went to bed earlier and got up then because I had to pee or whatever, they will start looking at me, and I have to tell them it is too early, and they will not get their breakfast at that point in time. But they have woke me up on occasion because they thought I was sleeping in past what they thought. They were hungry. They wanted their food, so they don't give a shit about my sleep, which is hard on my sleep. So, yeah, we're trying to get a better system because the current system's not working out for me so much. I mean, they're better about it because I started telling them that 3:30 was too early. I'm not real consistent about that, though, because if I wake up at that time because I have to go to the bathroom or whatever, then I don't want them to wake me up again 2 hours later because I didn't feed them. So, yeah, it's a pain in the ass. Anyway, so, like on the start point thing, right? So there's like a bunch of different little start points where I could have gone as far as where to start about what I've been talking or what I've been thinking about, because there's a lot of things that are converging, and it's like basically different ways of seeing the same point. And it's taken a really long time. Of course, let's talk about my chaos walls again, right? So there's been a lot of chaos that I've had to get out of my system in order to gain the clarity to start making sense of things and organizing my thoughts, right? So I spend a lot of time talking about how, for me, like yesterday's video, I talked a lot about how, she's looking out the window. Leave it. I don't know if my neighbor shouldn't be out because did he work today, or did he go up and visit or stay with his grandkid? I don't know. Don't fuss. Just don't. Anyway, yesterday I was talking about how it's been essential for me to do the videos because that's a means of talking it out of my system, right? So every time I've tried to focus on one specific thing to write about, it was like I kept finding myself going into like this denser, heavier stuff, and when I would try to write about it, I would just get like, it was like walking through the mud, right? And it became a struggle to continue once I got started on something, just because once I start getting that real dense, icky stuff, trying to process through that, then I couldn't go any further, right? But like the biggest thing was I can't write as fast as my head thinks. I mean, I can't even talk that fast, really. However, it does take less time to speak it out than it does to write it out. So I have to do the videos as a means of releasing a bunch of it and gaining some clarity for the other points, to be able to make sense of more things. And yeah. But like when I would start with the writing, it's like, nope, just can't do that anymore. We approach something with the heavier, ickier energies, and now we're walking through the mud and can't get out of it. Whereas this whole YouTube journey, this has been 2 years. I mean, granted, it's not like I've had times where I've done videos every day, but usually there's a few days in between. When I was starting out, there were like much more. I think like starting out, I want to say I started with like 2 videos a week, maybe 3. And I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. But then it became this sort of thing where it was just talk therapy. And once I realized that and allowed it to be that, then it became more of that. And then I was, processing through all sorts of things, but like the stuff with my family, it keeps coming up over and over and over again because there's so much to it, right? So I've talked about how, essentially in my lifetime, I've spent all my life collecting data. Now I'm trying to organize it after, after 40 years of just collecting the data. And, I'll go with 40 because that was with my knowings that I had my senior year in high school. There was the one where I knew that our drumline group was going to go our separate ways for a while, but then it would be Tyler's death in our mid-30s that brought the group back together for a time. He was 34, and I had just turned 35 when he died. So then once that happened, like that was the thing. Okay, that one and the one where I knew I would be 40 before I started making sense of things, I thought it somehow meant that Tyler's death was my fault. But what it meant was Tyler's death was the thing that gave me space to start processing things. Because with Tyler's death, as I've said many times, I finally just looked at the fact that he was gone. And it's like, whatever I might have tried not to share had I been talking to him or anybody else in person, it's like whatever's on the other side of death, I feel like he probably knows all there is that I would have kept hidden if it was somebody I was talking to in the physical, right? So since he was dead, it gave me the opportunity to consider that he already knows everything there is at this point on the other side. There's no point in me trying to hide it anymore. So I started writing more, candidly? And like actually, speaking directly to things that I had carried all of my life or most of my life and thought I was doomed to forever have to, just carry them and not be able to do anything with it, right? So just like all this baggage that I was collecting and, thought I was forever doomed to choke on my words because everything in life seemed to be blocking my ability to use my words, right? To have the clarity, which, as I'm thinking about this, also makes sense for that's exactly the point of the system that is this, this physical existence that we come to anyway. It's to keep providing us with the things that keep us asleep, right? That prevent us from being able to awaken to the idea of who we are and what we came here to do. So, if you're constantly distracted with doom scrolling or just, there's something in your system that you're not able to process through, it just causes you great anxiety. So you stress eat or you drink or use drugs or sex as various options, right? So any of these different ways that we try to numb the pain that we end up feeling if we just have to sit and be, right? So the system tries to keep us from processing through the things, right? So, you know, keep us in that lulled to sleep and trying to numb the pain rather than facing it head on, right? So it's like, okay, well, so with like the things in this country where they want you to work every damn day of your life, and, you know, government steals at least half your money, and, you know, all these other things. You don't have what you need to be able to survive, but they keep you moving all the time because we're taught this scarcity mindset, right? This idea that there's not enough to go around. But really, the only reason there's not enough to go around is because we accept that story. And because we've accepted that story, we don't because we accept that story, we keep seeing more of that story because that's what we're drawing back to us, right? So like there are different, like money is the lowest form of energetic exchange that there is. I've received this message many, many times, whether it's through my cards or just like things that I overhear. It's like, it being the lowest form of energy exchange, and yet we get obsessed with it because the world that, you know, that's trying to keep us lulled to sleep wants us in that mindset, because that's how it keeps us from being able to have the capacity to put stuff down and to start processing through things, right? So, okay, so I talk a lot about like the different like the okay, so like the masculine aspect as the doing, the taking action, the I don't know what else. The doing part is the most important part for that right now. Anyway, the feminine is the one that needs the rest, right? The importance of having the quiet time, the time in the darkness where you are resting because there's so much coming in and you can't deal with it when you're always receiving more and unable to process through it, right? So going back to my freaking chaos wall here, try not to mess my bed up. I mean, that doesn't matter, but chaos wall, right? So I kind of half-assed dusted because I knew I would be going back to that today. But yeah, like I said, half-assed because now I'm just seeing that it's not that great. But anyway, the point that when I painted this and I hadn't taken the time to skate to clear any of the extra junk from my system, right? Then it ended up looking like this big chaotic mess. And of course, this isn't the worst, but it's pretty it's pretty busy. But like being able to see it on the wall, you know, I talked about how when I first switched my bedroom and my office back around, so this is my bedroom again, I was staring at that wall one night and it's just like, that was in my system, right? So like the fact that I didn't skate beforehand because I was skating obsessively in the time frame that I was painting. But okay, so this was the wall that I knew. Well, this one and that one's actually was the more important one because it had big holes in it. So when I got the DVD rack moved, then I realized there were like 16 holes in the wall that needed patch because they were very obvious. So then I decided I was going to paint, right? So then I didn't have any of the indigo paint that my walls had been, but I had all these various other colors, like much smaller containers of paint that had been used over like my brother's house for like Gracie's rainbow wall and like some other stuff they had done. But you know, they just had all this paint they were just going to leave with the old house, and it's like, no. I will take that free paint. I like free paint. Free or cheap. You know, because projects. I didn't know what it was going to be for. I just knew I wanted that paint. Well, then it ended up being for the space, right? So, you know, the wall behind me, I'm not going to go into showing everything at the moment, but, you know, this part is part of my tree, right? So, and then whatever that is. This is the less chaotic side, because this was the only section that I was planning on painting until I like really enjoyed it, and then I didn't like how the indigo looked by itself when this was, you know, this. And so I decided I was going to continue. Since I was also in the process of rearranging things, I was in a little more of a time crunch. So once I decided I wanted to paint, I decided to skip skating beforehand and just go ahead and focus on painting so I could get things organized better. But then everything looked chaotic. And so, you know, like I realized that's a big part of why I had to skate as much as I did, because I was obsessive about it when I started. Of course, I started, roller derby taught me lots of the skating things that I needed, stopping and falling. And, you know, not being terrified of falling was a big thing, because for some reason I was really freaked out about the falling part of it. Excuse me. And in time, I think part of that was just because, you know, I'd been brought up with this, I mean, the idea that if it's not perfect, there's no point in putting it out there, right? If it's not perfect, somebody's going to make fun of it or have an issue with it or whatever. So I would just never start anything because I was so afraid of things not being perfect. And, you know, I think that was a part of that being afraid to fall, right? For skating. And it's like, it sounds silly because if you're playing roller derby, you need to expect that it's going to happen at some point or another. At some point you're going down if you're just learning. But I was absolutely terrified of it. And I finally had somebody one day who was like, what are you so afraid of? And she's like, so either the wall will catch you or the floor will catch you. She said, either way, you'll get back up and go on. It's like, oh, well, I mean, when you think about it that way. But like something so simple, like this idea that it was a problem to fall. It's a problem to make mistakes. Those things, right? So, you know, and that's kind of the... like, especially in this country, I feel like we're really taught that point of you have to do it all by yourself and never rely on anybody for anything. People will let you down, all of these various things, right? So it keeps us frozen in fear rather than being able to start doing something because we might fuck it up. And I think that's also been, well, okay, I've been talking a lot on here about the Lotus Tile Tarot video that I watched the other day, and she was talking about somebody whose brain goes so fast that they tend to stammer a lot. It's like, that's pretty much me, right? So before I watched that video, I really just hadn't been able to, I guess, make sense of that point. But but like I noticed that like when I talk, just like I get hung up a lot. It's not the same as stuttering by any means, but then every now and then, okay, so when I got my TBI, I was talking or I felt like my brain would get the hiccups, right? So it's kind of like that, but when I'm speaking. So it's like brain's got the hiccups and I just keep repeating the section of what I was trying to say because I can't find the thought anymore. But it's like, it's still there. Or maybe it wanders off for a little bit and I come back to something else. But, you know, once I watch that video and she's talking about, you know, this person that the brain just goes so fast that they stammer a lot. It's like, oh, that's fucking exactly it, right? But it's like, I remember this time when I was in high school, you know, I've talked about it several times too, where I felt like I was in church and I just started going back because of the suicide attempt and it freaked me the fuck out and I wanted to not do that. And I thought maybe church would help. In hindsight, it kind of actually complicated it. But there's lots of layers and levels to that as well. So I'm not going to say it as the be-all, end-all. Church fucked it up more. But the bad beliefs that I got from church over time, it didn't help. Which is where a lot of this conditioning comes from anyway, too. You know, because, I mean, essentially it's another thing to keep us lulled into complacency and away from who we are, right? To stay out of our sovereignty so we don't, so we're unable to do the things that we came here to do. So for me, okay, because I can see there's like these different branches of the thoughts. That's the one that I started with and that got me here, and then I started going another route. I'm getting a little better about pulling it together, maybe. So anyway, the thought, and when I was in high school and going back to church for the time, except for now I don't remember why I was talking about it. Yep. My brain runs off without me. Anyway, so, the veil. I had this moment because I was still struggling with the suicide aspect of things, right? It's like I had this attempt and I was trying to do the things to make that go away. But I thought because of what I was, you know, essentially receiving from the church was because it wasn't going away, I was doing something wrong. It's like I did what they told me to do. You know, I came and did the prayer and asked for Jesus to come into my life and all these things, and it didn't make it go away. If anything, it actually kind of made it harder. But I remember being there one day, and it was like I was given this peek behind the veil, and there's much better out there, and it doesn't have to be this hard. But I remember thinking, if one person can benefit from my going through this, then it will be worth it. So we proceeded, right? So the veil just shut right back up, and here I am trying to make sense of things again and do things the hard way, because that's what, you know, that's essentially what life was conditioning me for, right? Was you have to do things the hard way. You can't ask for help. You have to do it on your own. You know, asking for help is a weakness or whatever. But it's not. Just don't get hung up on that point, because I said that. The point of that thought is our imperfections are what allow others to step up into more of what they're supposed to be doing. So, right? So a big part of my journey on here has been specifically for the point of it does not have to be fucking perfect. Oh my God. If you don't start doing something, you'll never do anything, right? So yeah. So like, if one person can benefit from it, then I was willing to go through with it. So to make sense of it, to help someone else to be able to make sense of things for themselves, however that turns out, right? And so, like, some of those things with like the stammering and like where my brain just quits, or I got it. I did one video early on, and I noticed when I went to watch it back later that I had something in my teeth the whole time. It's like, that's pretty cool. Right? So just like the little dumb things. And got the videos where I got shat on by a bird not once but twice in a week. Right? So it was one of those things where it was the first time I was trying to talk about something that had any racial significance to it, and I was so afraid of allowing myself to go there that I ended up inadvertently manifesting this thing. And there was a part of me that wanted to take it as, okay, you got shat upon because you were getting ready to talk about this thing. That means don't talk about the thing. But it's important to talk about the uncomfortable things too, because, I mean, there's a reason they're uncomfortable, but they need to be addressed. If it's something that's there's a reason for it, right? So, like that specific story was, I went with my mom and my sister-in-law to Costco, and I was right out of undergrad. So, how old was I at that point? Like 22 or something. Maybe 3, that time frame. And mind you, white girl from a white family, went to a white school in a predominantly white town, right? That was my existence. I talked about the French field trip we went on in high school, where we went to one of the Indianapolis public schools, and the teacher was basically ready to threaten us within an inch of our lives not to fuck that up and not to say anything racist and stupid, because at least, okay, dude that got expelled for having a hit list that I was on, right? So the one that bought into my cousin's bullshit and wanted some experience. So because he believed what my cousin said about me, then I end up and trying to use him as an example of, no, I'm not. But then, it just gets me dumped on his freaking hit list, right? But he was the type of guy that was real big with like the Confederate flag and all that bullshit. He was one of those douches. And so it made sense, especially with our school being, like, I'm pretty confident this town was founded by the KKK. So, yeah, so there's some things of concern, right? So, even I do not know of anywhere that's existed in my lifetime. I know I've heard of other spaces where, anyway, the point of what I was trying to talk about, it was the first time I was trying to talk about this interaction that I had. Was okay. So I was like this 22, 23-year-old kid just out of undergrad. I was with my sister-in-law and my mom. And we're in Costco, and, we got our shopping done, and then we're standing in line, and we were behind these two black ladies, and there was this little kid in the cart that was probably like 4. And I was standing there I heard my mom and my sister-in-law talking, but I wasn't really engaged with what that was going on with them. I was just kind of, my mind was wandering elsewhere, and I was just patiently waiting, right? While I'm standing there, this little boy has flip-flops on, and he kicks one off. It wasn't intentional by any means, but he's a 4-year-old kid in the basket of this cart, and, wearing flip-flops, and he lost one of his flip-flops. And so, I wasn't going to not help him, not give him back his shoe. However, I was uncomfortable with trying to figure out. I was just going to put the shoe next to him in the basket so they didn't leave without it. But as I pick it up and start to, move my hand to put it in the basket, he puts his foot up. It's like, you can't ignore the little kid who's like basically waiting for your help, right? So since it's a flip-flop, I just put it on his foot. Didn't touch him, anything. Wasn't trying to be rude or anything, trying to make sure he left with everything that he had come in there with. But still uncomfortable with the any racial issues and the freaking town having the history that it does, and going to school with some of the assholes that I did, and being the person where it's like, I'm a white kid in a white town, right? So by that standard, it should be okay. By the standard that ultimately they were just looking for, if there was anybody of other races there, they probably would have had more people setting in on them for that purpose. Since we didn't have, there were a couple people that were like Hispanic, but I don't know what their experience was in those situations. What I do know is Buddha and another one bites the dust. What I do know is there wasn't a whole lot of racial variety in our school, and there were a lot of people that were still looking for something to have issue with somebody else, and I was somebody that frequently got dumped on, right? So because of my cousin and his bullshit, right? So because this bullshit rumor that came up when I was 8 and followed me around, that was pretty much, I was the one that was othered in that way, right? So it's like, I trying not to fuck anything up, trying not to make anything harder for anybody else, but also very much outcast in a system that, if the system was accurate, I shouldn't be outcast by. And yet still was, right? So trying to make sense of these different dynamics, and okay, I got this one dog that's getting ready to act up, so I'm going to go throw some food on the floor and distract them with that for a while, and try to gain my clarity on this thought further. So hold on. Okay, that was a good idea, because I realized that I completely wandered from one point and into another one again. So when I was trying to share that story for the first time, and then the bird shed on me, what I would have taken that to mean at any other point in my life was that meant I wasn't supposed to talk about that. The universe is saying, nope, don't do it. But I think it's actually the universe more preparing me for the fact that if you talk about things that make people uncomfortable, they're not going to like that, but that doesn't mean they don't still need to be talked about and dealt with at some level, right? So if I'm comfortable enough to call my family out on the bad behavior, like when my grandfather was making shitty remarks about the black people being on TV, it calls attention to the fact that that's not really an acceptable way of being anymore, right? That kind of douchey racism is bullshit. It always was. And yeah, anyway, which takes me back to the little kid. So I put this kid's flip-flop on his foot, and he gets this real thoughtful look on his face, and he says, white people helped. And I was just like, did I do something wrong? It's like, no, because all I did was make sure he left with a shoe. I picked it up off the floor and put it back on his foot because he put his foot up. I was just going to put it in the cart, but he put his foot up. So I put it on his foot. But it was one of those things because as soon as he said that, it was like really uncomfortable for everybody. Like his mom and her sister or friend or whoever it was, they're like this. And my mom and my sister-in-law were kind of like that. So I was like, I don't know what to do right now. Right? But it's just one of those things that, me and this little kid have this moment, while everybody else is minding their own business. And it's like, I remember walking out to the car after we were done, and I was thinking about it. And my thought at first was how sad that, they are teaching him that, it's not okay to ask for help or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But, that intuitive response was, what kind of world do they have to live in where they choose to, or where they feel they need to do that to keep this little boy safe? And, as soon as it was posed that way, it was like, not one that I'm okay with, right? I'm not okay with a system that, is teaching little kids that they need to expect to have problems all the time, because there are people out there who are extremely problematic, right? But as I talked about the other day, a big part of the reason for the problematic people is because they don't ever face accountability for their actions, right? And this fucking pedophile in chief is a prime example, right? He's just trying to fuck everything up for everybody and keep, throwing other things out there that are basically trivial, dumb shit things in a lot of ways as a means of distracting people from getting access to the files that he's clearly obviously in, because he's trying really hard to not let them be out there, but probably also more to protect the other insanely rich people that are also on there. Right? But it's like that whole tendency to want to deny that anything was wrong. Like my grandfather, right? Where he never apologized to anybody in his life, not because he didn't do anything wrong, just because he couldn't take accountability for his actions, right? So the thing he said that hurt me and that I called him out on because it hurt me at a time that I was going through the very thing, the divorce, that his family doesn't get divorced, right? So it's like when I called attention to it, people were freaking out because I was the one that was causing the problem with his, he's got this scenario or this illusion that or image or whatever the fuck that he's so set on. And then he makes this statement where his family doesn't get divorced when I'm actively trying to get divorced. So obviously what's that amount to? I'm clearly not part of this family, right? So all the different layers of that, right? So I've talked a lot about how the stuff that's going on or has gone on with my family that I'm learning from, the toxic environment, the toxic things that I've been sorting through in this space, it comes down to a long history of people not being held accountable for actions, right? So for like, especially like this whole white supremacy bullshit, that don't you start fussing, you just got a full belly. Now she's staring at me again. Yeah, but like the with the country, right? So, to have it, to be taught that Columbus discovered America, right? Like there weren't already people here. And then they are, God's gift to those people. And, I don't want to sit there. I don't know where I want to sit. And, because they feel entitled to the land or whatever, they just are okay with killing off big groups of people to get what they want. But that's, religion has taught that, right? Christianity especially, because it's been a long time since, the life of Jesus was not what the church wants you to believe it is. The part that stuck out to me, I think the most when I was growing up, was the part where something about Jesus said, "But I have called you brothers." It's like, okay, brothers, equals. And yet the church made it, he's up here. And you need something outside of yourself to save you. And to fix you because you are wrong and you are going to hell and you are just an evil person by having been born. That makes you evil. All these fucked up thoughts. Right? But it's like, and throughout history, it's literally just those masquerading behind the illusion of what religion wants you to believe, getting the sense of entitlement to change the rules so they can kill people off to take what they have. Right? And what happens with years and years and years and years upon years and generations and all these things of doing this? You get what we got now. A bunch of bullshit. Right? But I read something a couple years ago about the term witch wasn't used as a bad thing until the 1400s, I believe. And it was somebody wanted to take the land from the widows who could have land no other way unless they inherited it, right? So they got the land when their husbands died, and the church, or the government, whatever, because, government and religion, they're fuck buddies. And so they change it. And the next thing you know, it's because somebody has been accused of being a witch, now it's okay to kill them. Right? So, and some of the stupid shit that they would use for, for the Salem witch trials, where, if they drowned a witch, if somebody had been accused of being a witch and they tried to drown her, if she drowned, she wasn't a witch. But then she also wasn't alive, so she couldn't have whatever she had that they might want. But if she was able to survive it, then she was a witch. And then she got to be killed another way, right? So it's there's no winning, right? So the system, okay. Oh. I found this page. I don't even know how I got to it. I was on Instagram, and I don't know what account I was normally on, or I was on already, where I clicked into the comments and somebody had suggested this other page, and it was talking, it was the comedian, Zoltan. He was talking about the process, or when he learned what the process of women having their eggs frozen, what that entailed. And, he's doing this little sketch about it, where he was not realizing how it was as complicated as it was, right? And in the comments, someone had said something about men learning about women's the complexity of women's issues or something is like a new favorite pastime or something. And another comment in response to that suggested this page. I wanted to say it's called A Man with a Dark Tan, and it's a black dude. So it was like, I laughed when I, clicked in, and, that was his username. And, like the main thing, the big thing was he's learning about like all these different things with women's health, right? Because by and large, men haven't cared because it doesn't really affect them, right? The women serve the purpose of being barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen kind of bullshit, right? And as long as you're making babies, which they then don't really want to take care of, you're right. The church is all about being pro-life until the baby's born, and then they don't give a shit what happens, right? So it's like, no, you're just trying to control everything to the detriment of all. Like one video that he was talking about was when he just learned what chainsaws were originally created for, and it had something to do with C-sections. Was it that? I don't remember, but something on that line, right? That's the reason the chainsaw was invented, right? What the fuck? And there was one thing, I don't even remember. But anyway, like just a bunch of like the little things that he was pointing out, and it was just like, because, right? It's right there. Let me see if I can I can grab the thought and verbalize it. Maybe not. Now kids just staring at me again. This, y'all, is very intent and very wants something. But she's very cute. Are you cute? Don't talk back. Just look. So yeah. No. Oh, he was. No, we're not there yet. Take a break. You just ate anyway, nerd. It had something to do with the comment was something about in a world made for men. It's like, that's yes. Right? So, they haven't really wanted to care about women's issues because they don't see women as people, right? As equals to them or anything. They see them as less than. They don't care about that if it's less than. And, add in if there's any kind of color variation, right? So, which is a big part of why the whole white supremacy structure actually is dependent on white women going along, the first line of complacency, like my grandmother, right? So my grandfather was an asshole, but everybody catered to his illusion, keeping his illusion alive. That was all they cared about, because that he was, led to believe that he was the most important and the only one that mattered. And so what he wanted, which was the illusion of the happy family, he didn't want the happy family. He wanted the illusion of the happy family. So, so he and my grandmother could be married for however many years. And, I think 60 some. And, I'm thinking the freaking local newspaper article that was written about them that I came across on our counter in the other room a while back. And it was talking about, my grandma was saying, well, in our time, divorce wasn't an option. It just wasn't an option. So you made it work. But it's like, you didn't make it work because you had any self-respect or because you valued yourself at all. And it's just because you bought into the bullshit that you were conditioned to agreeing with, and because you agreed with it, you continued creating this system where girls didn't matter, and it didn't matter if anybody was struggling with anything emotionally or anything else, because you just didn't deal with it, right? You can beat people into submission to keep the illusion alive, because the illusion is all that matters, right? Because it wasn't the family that mattered, because everybody's miserable, and that's okay. As long as it looks like we enjoy spending time together, right? So when we're going over to their house every Sunday, because keeping the illusion alive, man. But when it's a very toxic system that you're set on keeping the illusion alive for, what good is it doing anyway, right? It's just people being complacent because so far it hasn't been a problem for them. And so they're going to keep agreeing with what they perceive as always having been, because it's somehow better, even though it's not. And it just runs over a whole lot of people. So, right, going back to the point of, like the fact that the whole fucking nation was started because somebody claimed that they discovered something, even though there were already people here, but because they felt entitled to it, because they were bringing religion at that point, right? It gave them the sense of superiority, right? And they had to fix things for these heathen people that were here and going to hell if they didn't take the church bullshit and have that so far forced down their throat that they, whatever. Anyway, and through use of people that they stole from other lands, from their homes and families, to make them do what they wanted, right? So the system's all about keeping the illusion alive. And this is nowhere where I was going to try to go with this today. God, it's 58 minutes in. I don't even know if I want to approach that, because I feel like that would just... I feel like it was just going to make things immensely longer. I'm kind of ready to come back down to the little bit shorter times. I don't know, maybe it's something I need to spend more time writing about before I try to focus too much on it in a video. Taz agrees. I'll go ahead and... because I'm not really ready to be done yet. Okay, so I watched this Regita Shaman video a couple days ago, and she was talking about how the masculine operates more in the mental space and the feminine more in the heart space, right? So mind and heart. And I set in on thinking about like this twin flame connection, as I've talked about this on here a lot too, essentially he's the guiding light for me. And, I've talked about his Leo sun and me having all these freaking cancer placements, right? So if we only go look at his Leo sun, because I don't know any of the rest of his birth chart, because I don't know him in person, right? All I know is dude made me have to go through a whole lot of stuff to heal through and process through, and there's no way it's not something because this version of me does not exist without having encountered his energy and starting the forced process of healing. It's the universe forcing me to have to go through it, because suddenly it was just like, once I said the thing in his live stream and he responded, and then it was like somebody flipped the lights on and I was a little mouse running through the kitchen, right? So it's like I was kind of like, ooh, shit, I've been spotted. And then what happened was, I immediately started having this really strong sense of not feeling safe in my own body. And so it's been a very very busy healing process in the meantime. And again, the only reason I started the channel was because he had to be in a spotlight for me to find him, but how was he ever going to find me if I didn't start doing more than I'd ever done? So with the zodiac part of it, so I know he's got a Leo sun, and I know I got my Cancer, Sun, Moon, Rising, Mercury, and Mars, meaning I'm very moon-led, whereas he's sun-led, right? So, so which makes sense with the counterparts anyway being essentially opposites. So, when I started thinking about me feeling all this darkness, and, okay, so I've talked on here about the vision that I had, I want to say maybe back in August, where, excuse me again, I had the vision. Okay, I was trying to explain ultimately so I've talked about the 5 guys in the band, right? And it was this specific combination of 5 guys that essentially was the thing that sort of activated me in my process, right? And in this vision, I'm trying to explain like the connection with the chords between all of them, and I've drawn the picture on here before. It's like, so I had this day several months ago where I was thinking about the chords between people. And so I was thinking in this 5 guys in a band scenario, right? Because that was one of my knowings my senior year. It was Tyler's death, me being 40 before things started making sense, and then these 5 guys that were very important to me and essentially were here to change the world. Right? So like these were the 3 things that I care, or like the 3 strongest, I think, that I've always had with me. And I've talked about how I saw it wrong before because it was a reference point. But then once I knew who these 5 guys were and realized that them being together and making this powerful music, that essentially, because when I was introduced to it on the radio because of the other band that they were going to be on tour with, then it was like, wow, I really like this sound, kind of a thing, right? It's like, I really like this. This is awesome. So, I got really into it. And then I started following him and listened to him, blah, 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 all the things. So when I was trying to think through the chords, so I drew 5 dots to represent each of them. And then, I'm drawing lines to connect each to the other, just as a means of looking at how the chords look from this perspective, right, that I'm trying to make sense of. The way is, okay, so I see the first guy being connected to all the others, right? So I draw a line to all 4 other guys. And then I go to the next guy. It's like, well, he's already connected to this one, but then he's also connected to these others, right? And then, to the next one, well, he's connected to these other 2 now, but then he's, draw the cords. And what I realized was, with them all connected, if you round out the one that connects the ones at the edges, it's a pentagram. And it's like, so it's basically this sort of a seed, right? So, like, they were this activation point. Their 5 energies coming together and establishing this connection was what woke me up to this process, right? It was very early on the process, so I wasn't really making sense of it, right? But, so in this vision, because I don't have the cords or anything like that, I don't have, for the vision's sake, I didn't have paper on me when I was trying to explain it to the guys in the band. And so I ended up laying on the floor and having like one, okay, so like the counterpart was at my head. Then the 2 that I've talked about being somewhat closer than the other 2 energies were at my hands, and I've talked about that on here before. The day I got on the treadmill at the gym and was like, okay, so what's this connection? Why is that seem like it's even more strong or stronger? And, I get on the treadmill and I envision myself in this other space where I'm staring at these 2 guys and we're just kind of looking at each other. And I hear myself say, what, you don't recognize your sister because you've never seen her in the physical before? And I was like, okay, so there's like a closer connection like that for those 2 anyway, right? So, and then the other 2 guys were at my feet just because, slightly further away, but still important. And then, so I'm looking up at my counterpart who starts out in this vision standing, but then the longer I sort of look up at him, it's like he's suddenly aware that something else is going on and he starts tuning in. And, so eventually in this dream, 7:17, I just glanced over right at 7:17 and I was talking about that earlier, I think, if I did that in this video. Actually, I might not have done that in this video. I think I started it and cut it off in another one because that's point here too. But anyway, I'll get there in a minute. So in this vision, as he is starting to be more aware of me, like he like comes down and when the vision ended, he was sitting on the floor by my head and like we were looking at each other, but at the same time there was still some sort of gap. And probably just because we haven't actually met in person yet. Well then, since I mentioned these cards too, I pulled cards one day and they were like, I want to say 8 that came out that day. And these were 2 of them and they ended up in this position, right? So okay. And of course, 7 of Pentacles and 17 for the star. 717. So I laid these cards out like this and it was just how they came out and how I placed them. But then I started looking at it and this vision came to mind. And, essentially, I'm there looking up at this light. And then eventually he's tuning in and he starts, focusing the light down, right? So here he's kind of like doing this little hand thing to focus the light on the plant. But then, it's like it's like a continuation here, right? The roots are actually down here where she is, right? And he is up here. So then the idea of Mother Earth and Father Sky. So that comes to mind, right? So so I'm looking at this, I'm connecting it to this vision, I'm connecting it to this point where Regita was talking about the other day how, the masculine is, you know, the mental part of the connection, and the feminine is the heart, right? So if we want to consider it, you know, the heart of the earth, where the seeds get planted, you know, and things happen in the darkness. Okay. Last night when I was writing, I spent some time thinking about the idea of him as the guiding light on this journey, right? So, you know, I've talked about how I've realized that some of the things that have come up, the things that I have spoken into existence. So, excuse me. So, like the part where, when I was in high school and I was really frustrated with my mom and a bunch of stuff, so I set the intention that I would not have kids unless I could heal from the stuff that she was putting on me to have to heal from, right? So these little things where I've started to set intentions for things that I wanted or didn't want, right? So with this idea of, you know, the being the heart of the connection, as I've set these intentions, and, you know, he's receiving them, right? At some level, he is receiving them, right? And so when I set the intentions for the things that I want or don't want, then, you know, he's at some level connecting to that and also aligning in some way with those things. And also through, you know, like the different things that have come up on my journey to make me, you know, kind of be more specific about what I do want or what I don't want, you know. And I've talked about like the you know, the dogs, right? So like, I knew after the situation with my ex, he was clearly not the same kind of dog person that I am, right? My ex was all talk, but didn't actually give a shit about taking care of the animals, right? But I want somebody who loves dogs as much as I do and wants them around and likes being around them, but not so much that, you know, it's like the one guy that came up, the Asher House dude, you know, it was like I started getting stuff come across my path about his, you know, his rescue stuff that he's doing. And it's like, I realized it's like, that is way more than I want in, like, for my specific life, right? That's a lot more dog than I mean, especially, well, this little turd just stares at me like this all the time because she wants something. I don't need 100 dogs looking at me like that. Not that I think he has that issue. This is just one very spoiled dog that doesn't like being told no. Anyway, but like just some of the things that have come up on that, and it's like, nope, that's too much, right? So for me to be able to have something presented to me by the universe as a get more specific, and it was like, no, that's too much, right? So it's like the same as meat, right? Maybe acts stupid over the ones he has, but I mean, you know, but doesn't need 5,000 of them or whatever. And you know, he's got other stuff going on. You know, those little things that come up just to, I mean, ultimately, because he's the light, right? You know, he's also showing me in our connection where I'm being too vague, where, you know, and like some of the things that have come up with me coming up with what I want in a partner, and then being guided to things where it's like, yes or no, right? And then eventually coming around to the connection, or to the idea that this connection is the thing that's directing me on the path, right? Because, because he's the guiding light and I'm down here hanging out in the darkness, which there again, right? Because no, I need you to stop. She just stopped wagging her tail. This is going to take a long time to explain. I'm already like 15 minutes in and there's still so much. But, this is also me making sense of it too. So like these are things that I'm starting to weave together now, but they've come up over the span of several months, right? So this has been like, okay, so the twin flame connection, the activation point was 2011 or 2021. I mean, but I got into the music with the Five Guys before that in 2020. So what I think that is actually is because he wasn't the full version of himself either, right? So it took the combination of 5 as a means to activate me on my process because he also wasn't in the full expression of himself, right? So he has ways he is with them, I'm sure. But, as far as it goes back to that, the vision, right? So he's looking up in front of him and then he starts tuning in and starts looking down and realizing there's something staring back from the darkness, right? Which takes me back over here to one of my favorite little archetypes, right? So Hecate, the goddess with her black dogs, which goes again to the thing in 2020 where I watched the Gem Goddess video, and 2020 I'm watching this Gem Goddess video, and she for the pile that I picked because it was a pick a card reading, she said black dogs are important and mean it's about time, right? So I've had Ziva since 2013. I've had Gidget and Taz since 2017. But never, okay. And Ziva, my little Kelpie, because she, my ex, who, was such a dog person, he had a Kelpie before, and he loved that dog, so he wanted to replace that dog, essentially. So I just wanted a dog. He wanted a Kelpie, so I started looking on, my big thing was rescues. So I looked on Petfinder and found this rescue that had 2 Kelpie puppies, and they were sisters. And we ended up with Ziva because she was just perfect, right? She was perfectly marked according to his standards. And so it's like all the stuff I didn't really care about, like, the appearance of things. I like things that are unique, right? So like that was, he had his sights set on her because she had the perfect symmetry and all this stuff. And, because she looked perfect, she's the one we got. She was also a rescue, so that appeased that side of me. But that was the first black dog that I've had. And then I ended up with 2 more that are primarily black. So then in 2020, I'm watching this tarot reading and she says black dogs are important and mean it's about time. And then, I start taking the classes at Inner Path in January 2024. And one of the first things we talk about is color, and, as a means of protecting your energetic boundaries and whatnot. And then the next week in Annie's class, she mentions black as the color of source because all things come from the void. And it was like all these things converging into this one moment where suddenly I'm realizing that at a time I was unable to care for myself energetically. It's like God gives me brings these 3 dogs into my life that are serving the purpose of protecting my energy at some level from, from my toxic ex, right? So, and then there's just like all these different things, right? But then I read something, okay, so I've had the draw to Hecate for a while, but then when I found something that said something about her black dogs, and it was like, that's my fucking archetype, man. So she's this goddess that is, she leads people through the darkness, right? So it's like everything that I'm making sense of and that I'm putting together and sharing in this space, what anybody wants to take from it one way or another, but that's ultimately, my process is what I'm sharing, which is ultimately my way of doing that, right? And, my black dogs who've been here helping me to protect my energy from, my toxic ex and now my toxic family, there's that whole level, right? So, and then because we're thinking about, okay, so if the masculine is the mental or the mind and the feminine is the heart, well, that also goes back to that darkness piece, right? So when I talk about my counterpart being the light and I'm staring up at the light, and then he starts noticing something's happening, there are things shifting somehow, so he starts tuning in more and, coming down to earth, if you will. And then, so then suddenly it's like this connection is like strengthening, right? And then also, okay, I'll just talk with this one behind me. Okay, so I talked about my yin yang a lot. And this one specifically, it came across my, my little feed thing on Etsy. And I got on there one morning, my phone's all grayed out because it's still in sleep mode. And this yin yang happens across my path. And it's like, the feminine as the black spot, right? And the masculine as the white, but then there's the light and the dark and the dark and the light, right? So, okay, so if we take this as me and that is my heart space and this is him and that is his heart space, right? So then it's like, okay, so as above, so below, right? So that level of things, right? But when I saw this, this picture of this yin yang, my eyes went straight to the fact that boundary was there, right? And, I've talked about my chaos walls. I did show that today, so I was feeling like I was being scattered all over the place, but then I realized there was a boundary. I just, I didn't realize it and was, essentially not tuning into it because I wasn't tuning into my heart and what I wanted, for within, which is essentially, the whole, this makes the whole, right? So each part, is complicated because while I am a half of this connection and he is a half of the connection, it's like we're still whole people. So understanding it as we are whole within ourselves, but also we are a part of this other thing, right? But when I started thinking of, when I saw this yin yang and then suddenly it's like that boundary's there, I just never trusted that the boundary was there. And then once I made that connection, I saw this thing in her path and I got really drawn to it and I was like, I have to have that. And the biggest thing, okay, it's called Guardian Angel, but immediately it made me think of the twin flame connection and this boundary point, right? And so it's like when I've felt broken and damaged and all this stuff, and I didn't realize that there was a boundary there, but then once I realized the boundary's there, then it's like there's this protective aspect that I wasn't aware of before. So now that I'm tuning into, there's that, okay, going back to my thought process last night of him being the guiding light, and then as he's directing my path from within, right? So like his energy, right, is this thing that's guiding me and helping me kind of navigate some different things for myself and my journey. Well, as I'm tuning in, that's stirring something in him, right? In the heart space, because that's where I operate. And so as he starts tuning in, then it's like coming to this sort of a bigger convergence, right? So like these different, like, because everybody has both the masculine and feminine qualities within them, and it's about marrying the two within. It's not something that has to happen on the outside by any means. This is that Christ consciousness point that the church molested into something else. Because if you unify the two parts within yourself, the masculine and the feminine qualities, marry them together to become the whole person, then you can step into doing what you came here to do. Step into using your gifts and recognizing them as gifts, right? So like, going back to my chaos walls, right? To when I didn't have the boundary, or when I wasn't aware of the boundary keeping me safe, I felt scattered all over the place, which is exactly what the system wants, because if we are unable to step into the fullness of who we are, then that's where the system gets to basically do whatever the fuck it wants and keep us in our oblivion. But the more people that start stepping into the fullness of who they are, the full expression of who they are, with strength and softness, right? The capacity for, that part where the system tries to demonize emotions in boys and men, because that's another way it is assaulting the feminine, right? This is the heart, right? So, which is why the system that is, treats women as less than, because it doesn't value the spiritual aspect, because, again, with the feminine being in the upper three chakras, that's throat, crown, and third eye. Not in that order. And then the masculine rules over the root, sacral, and solar plexus. And then they come together in the heart space, right? As they come together, which, that creating, coming into unity, bridging the two aspects of yourself is what brings you into wholeness, right? So that wholeness is that God energy. That is what the system wants us out of. Because then the shit that's going on because of the division won't be able to continue anymore. But it takes more and more of us stepping into this wholeness and realizing that, and, being able to empathize with other people, and have compassion for other people, which again is what the toxic masculinity side of things is trying very much to not allow to happen, which is where, the system, where, like, especially with like Christian nationalism and all that bullshit, what they're trying to do, keep people divided, because if they keep people divided, then the system can continue operating as it has. But the more we bridge the gap within ourselves, and the more we more and more of us step into wholeness, then the system can't. It has to change, right? So that came together well enough headache. I think I've had a headache most of this video this time. It's just like right here. So I don't know what's going on with that. Probably need to drink more water, among other things. Probably won't skate. I thought I was going to skate, but just meh. Not with that. But yeah, but like, I think part of it too is just that it's me trying to, because I've been so much in my head trying to make sense of these different things and try to communicate them in some kind of way. I mean, that could be part of it. There could be a lot of things that could be contributing to that headache. All the same, it's there. Kind of over it. But yeah. She's staring at me again. Come down. Nope, stay. All right. No. Stay. She knows it's time, damn it. She's smiling at me. Yeah, so I'm wrapping it. So, as always, I appreciate you. Until the next time.